It is always an exciting moment for us, you know, whenever we are going to have an opportunity of interacting with the patron. I know that you are all looking forward to it, but I can tell you that the most interesting part is that virtually everyone else is always looking forward to interacting with the patron. So it is always a special moment. So we know that he makes huge sacrifices, you know, in order to engage in this kind of fashion, regardless of his busy schedule. I think we all know that the work that he's currently doing, you know, is keeping him so busy that he returned last night, but he was prepared to be with us today and is going to be spending most part of the day actually here. So we always want to extend, you know, our gratitude to him for that.
I'd like to say, indeed, we're very glad to meet with you this morning, but glad particularly that you've joined this course, which we hope will help in terms of the purposes for which it was established. Because I'm sure that all of us here are conscious of this leadership challenge which we face on our continent, and therefore the need to develop the kind of cadre that the continent needs to provide that particular function, to discharge that particular responsibility of leadership. And really, I do hope that the course here will help to further to empower you to be able to play that role. Normally, I ask you questions and you answer. So that's normally what we do. But maybe we can start by you asking questions.
My question is around youth development, because that is the field I'm involved in. I just wanted to ask the patron of his opinion on the approach to youth development by African states specifically, and also to check if he is of the opinion that youth development is prioritized, because the statistics that has been floating around is that youth form a significant portion of the population, of most populations in Africa. But I just wanted to find out if there is significant attention being put, whether it's institutional arrangements, it's finally that kind of attention.
I just wanted to check for your opinion with regard to the Ugandan issue, the anti-gay issue. Your opinion on that, especially the reaction by the World Bank and European countries to suspend developmental aid to that country. And the second one is that during the burial of the late Nelson Mandela, you were shown on TV to be in deep reflection, especially when the Tanzanian president was talking about their contribution to the struggle of South Africa. So if you could just take us back in time, what were you thinking at the time? And the last one is the message of the Zimbabwean president, Mr. Robert Mugabe. In his message, he actually asked the Zimbabweans to reconsider honoring Julius Nyerere, because according to him, Julius Nyerere has been humiliated in terms of honors that have been bestowed on African leadership. I would want to indulge your opinion on that.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you said, he has touched on what I was going to ask, but maybe I'm just going to put it differently. The anti-gay bill, the anti-gay bill in Uganda. Yeah, it looks to me like there is a bigger picture to this whole issue. And is this really the agenda that we should be preoccupied with right now? I mean, what about the issues of corruption, underdevelopment? A large population in Uganda is still living below the poverty line. This debate and the bill has evoked so many feelings. Some people saying, well, the West is imposing their values on us, their lifestyle on us. But I was thinking, look, we can't, I had somebody say that it's an African, this whole thing of whatever, it's an African. But the African, I went back to study and discovered the Africanness that they are referring to, the Africanness that existed before the colonialists came, had in itself respect for human rights, the innate respect for and the dignity for the people. And I was thinking what America and the other guys are trying to say is respect basic human rights. So I just want to know that from you, Mr. President, is there a bigger picture, and is this the agenda that we should be preoccupied with right now? Thank you.
Last year or year before last, I was in Kampala at Makerere University, and they arranged that there should be a town meeting. So we went and met in the town hall so that the residents and the ordinary non-university people, Ugandans, could attend. So, so there was a lady who then stood up there and asked a question, and she said, she's a lesbian, she says. And then she said, there is this bill which is being discussed in the Ugandan parliament, which has now become law. What do I think? She said, what do you think? So I'd wished she hadn't asked the question, but she did. So I said to her, you know, in South Africa, we used to have what was called the Immorality Act, which had to do with black and white relations. So I said to the Ugandans that, you know, then you would have the police, you'd have police officers having to be snooping around in people's bedrooms to find out who was sleeping with whom. So I said, look, my own view is exactly as our colleague from Kenya just said, is that the continent is facing too many challenges of poverty, of underdevelopment, of disease, all of these things. That really, I mean, if we've got people who have got whatever competence they have in terms of the public service, it's better to get them to be devoted to these challenges rather than peeping into people's bedrooms. So please, let's leave this thing alone. I said, that's right, I would say. You know the position in this country. I mean, we took a position here, quite deliberately, that there should be no discrimination based on sexual preference. That was our view then. It remains my view today. And really, quite what harm what people do privately in their bedroom does to society, I can't understand. I may not like it. I might, I know Villiers Teresa's wife. She's a lovely woman. I'm always puzzled, but why did she marry Villy? So I object to this marriage. But is it necessary for me to pass a law to prohibit? That is not. So that would be my view. But nevertheless, I think, of course, you must recognize the fact that there is this opinion on the continent. I've heard many Ugandans argue this case very strongly, very passionate about it. And you'd have people in South Africa also very passionate about this. I'm sure it's all over the continent. So it's necessary to engage this debate. I think that people who are concerned about what the Ugandans have done need indeed to engage the Ugandans to discuss this matter. And I think that's more likely to produce an outcome that, for instance, would address this human rights thing, rather than to say, I'm going to beat you on the head because you've done this. Because I suspect that beating on the head will result in more stubbornness. To say, no, I'm not going to be dictated to, and so on. I'm saying that perhaps people to engage Ugandans if they want to discuss this. But I think in the reality of what the continent is facing, I think we've got much larger issues, much more pressing, much more important. And indeed, I would want to focus on those, including this question that was raised about youth development. I'm sure you know that there is a charter on youth rights, youth development of the African Union, which I think is a very good charter. It's very comprehensive as an obligation or a guideline, framework for the member states of the African Union. This is what you need to do with regard to the youth. So at least we can say as a continent that there is a continental view about what needs to be done to address this matter of youth development. The policies exist. But I think it would be correct to say that in terms of what then practically is being done, that clearly not enough attention has been paid to this matter. I don't even know in how many African countries with that charter, youth charter having been adopted, how many of them have then taken practical measures in their own countries to ensure that there exist the institutions and processes to address the objectives that are spelled out in them. I don't know. But I think it would be correct to say that broadly, the continent hasn't paid as much attention to this issue as it should have. But I think the good thing now is everywhere you hear more vigorous discussion of this issue. And indeed, even the getting together of all these Africans from different countries getting together to say what do we do about this particular matter. So I think there is better focus on it. And I would imagine that part of the reason for that is what happened in North Africa. Because when this mass uprising took place in Tunisia and Egypt and so on, people drew attention, the reports drew attention to this, that this was young people, youth, driven by unemployment and all of that. So I'm sure that people began to be more sensitive, that in our countries we have a similar phenomenon as was exhibited there in North Africa. And therefore unless people do something, you can expect that there might very well be a youth uprising in the same way as happened in Tunisia and so on. But clearly I'm saying that the answer to your question, whether enough is being done, I would say no. But fortunately, I think there's both a policy for the continent and clearly a better consciousness about the matter. So I hope therefore that indeed there would be better movement on this. I don't know, I didn't hear what President Mugabe said about late Julius Nyerere. I mean, if he was saying more needs to be done to honor Julius Nyerere, I would agree. I think all of us would agree. Because indeed, he contributed enormously to the thinking about where the continent should go. Professor Mamdani from UZ Makerere University says that one of the major challenges that the continent faces is that in many of our countries, we don't have a common political citizenship. So people define themselves in other ways. In Kenya, I'm a Kikuyu, I'm a Luo, and I'm a Kalenjin, and so on. And in South Africa, something else, I'm a Venda, I'm a Zulu, I'm a Xhosa, and all that. It says that, and this is part of what leads to conflict and instability and so on. And so these groups compete against one another, believing that, of course, they've got interest. Each has got its own interests, which are in conflict with the interests of the other group. And it says, except for Tanzania, where under the leadership of Julius Nyerere, you had this thing develop of a common political citizenship, which makes it difficult to divide the Tanzanians in terms of, for instance, ethnic things or whatever. It's certainly true that that sense of national cohesion, you sense it better in Tanzania than in many of our countries. That might be superficial, that underneath there's something else that might be brewing, but at least they try to address this matter in a way that was, I think, was successful. So I'm saying that I don't know what President Mugabe said, but if he was saying it is important for the continent to honor better, more Julius Nyerere, I think would all of us say that's correct. I do hope that at Madiba's funeral, the TV didn't show me on sleeping when some big people were speaking. No, I would imagine that I listened very carefully to everybody, including the President Kikwete from Tanzania. But of course, President Kikwete was telling a very important story, which relates to Julius Nyerere. And what President Kikwete was saying, here's the relationship between the people of Tanzania and South Africa, which relationship contributed enormously to our liberation here. So, to remind us that there's that historic link between South Africa and the rest of the continent. And I think, of course, what that must mean to us as South Africans, that we have an obligation to see what we can do as a country to help to contribute to the common advance and the common progress of our continent. It was important for President Kikwete to communicate that message at that funeral. I'm not sure what I was thinking, I don't know, but I was listening to what he was saying.
Since you left office, you've been doing a lot of work on the continent. So my question is there any particular reason why you focus primarily on certain part of the continent? I would love to see you in Cameroon, and by the way, with all due respect, what does it take to invite the former president? That's my first question. The second question is, I've been following you even when you were in office. I haven't been stalking you, but I've been following you. I've been following you intellectually, so sometimes I go back to your speeches, maybe when I try to impress someone. And I remember when you were dealing with the Zimbabwean land reform, I think you were against the way they were handling things, how they were handling the land reform and other stuff there in Zimbabwe. And I was, a few days ago, I was excusing books, and you wrote a very interesting piece in the latest edition of the magazine called The Thinker, where you're actually advocating the Zimbabwean indigenization. So I don't understand what has changed since, from being against the way they were handling things to actually advocating it. Would you please tell us, if I'm correct, would you please tell us what happened?
My question is mainly based on the position I'm in. Do you feel that there's enough being done to groom young leaders at a time where the current struggle, freedom fighters, government is still running the country? Mainly because I'm the youngest of 4 children, and my father put me in a leadership position at a time when he's still alive, where I can still go back to him and ask him what's going on, what should I do, and navigate with him. Now, do you feel that enough is being done to groom the young leadership?
Mr. President, I just want to know if you feel that the South African state has made any measures, like great measures, in educating the youth about voting. Because, for instance, when it comes to me, I'm 26, but it's going to be my first time voting. Because I always had an attitude saying, why should I vote? To me, it was just a holiday, no work or no school to me. So I just want to know if the government is making an impact in teaching young people to vote, the importance of voting. I've just realized that it is important this year. I think last year that it is important. All this time I never got interested.
My claim to fame is that I come from Brighton Township and I was a neighbor of Umgov. My question, Mr. President, relates to a piece in the newspapers that came out late in January, where it was reported that the Deputy President of the ANC has now been deployed as one of the people to resolve the conflict between Riek Machar and Salva Kiir in Southern Sudan. And my question to you then is, what should we read into that? Is it South Africa adding more capacity to the process? Or is it a sign that you will be exiting the process, having been involved in it from the beginning when the Sudan was still one country?
My question to you, Your Excellency, is that we're seeing a lot of conflicts happening on the continent. Can you attribute that to colonialism, and if so, how? Or are we seeing a new dynamic raising its head? And if that is so, what is it? What is it that is making us such an intolerant people? And if you can identify why is it that there are so many conflicts happening, what do we need to do to resolve those conflicts before there is so much blood that is shed?
The work that we've been doing on the continent has not been out of choice as a result of our own decisions. For instance, the work that we've been doing in Sudan, it's at the instance of the African Union, which said here there's various challenges in Sudan, therefore we need to put together a panel to assist the African Union to help to resolve these problems in Sudan. So we say, okay, fine, we'll do that. And this other panel, which I chair, which is on the illicit financial outflows from the continent, it's the same thing. The matter was discussed by the African finance ministers, together with the Economic Commission for Africa. And then they asked, they said, could I please lead this particular panel? Which is all right. So it's not that I'm choosing not to come to Cameroon. It's what the AU decides. So maybe you can complain to them about why they have not sent me to Cameroon. Indeed, you know, when in 1998, the tensions around the land question in Zimbabwe emerged on the surface. It became much sharper. And so we spoke to President Mugabe then and said, we, the South African government, would like to engage the British government on that issue. And therefore, could the Zimbabweans give us a bit of time to do that? In the meantime, not to be agitating about this matter. So they agreed. So indeed, we then engaged the British Prime Minister, at the time was Prime Minister Tony Blair, and said to him, the British had made a commitment at the time of the signing of that Lancaster House Agreement, they and the Americans, to finance land redistribution in Zimbabwe. And that now you could see that in the media, this issue has come up very sharply in Zimbabwe. Can the British please honor that promise? And we said to the British Prime Minister then that if he agrees to what we're saying, then we would go visit, we would attach other countries to also to join the UK in terms of supplying these funds. He agreed, and then said it was not necessary for us to mobilize any further, they would do that themselves, which they did. As a consequence of which there was a conference that was then held in Zimbabwe, I think again in 1998, to pledge these resources for the land reform. So we thought that had worked. But in the end, the pledges didn't come through, partly because the British government turned around and said to other potential donors that this money would be used really to give land to Robert Mugabe's friends. So actually that thing didn't move, which is why you then get this thing now erupting in the way that it finally did. Now, it was our view in the whole of this region that yes, indeed, the land reform must take place. But it was necessary to handle it in a different way. And we argued that with President Mugabe and the government and ZANU-PF leadership then, to say, let's handle this reform in a different way. Because we thought, given the political situation then internationally, that if they handled it through basically expropriation, that might produce a negative response. We didn't have enough strength to withstand that negative response from the rest of the world. It was entirely a tactical question. But that the land reform must take place, yes, indeed it should. So that was our position. Of course, they took a different view, practically, which was that what we were proposing was not doable. There's a long story about this. For instance, at some point, 3 of the Zimbabwe ministers